Hello. I had just finished editing and I was still uploading the video I made about Oakeshott and Cathy Newman when I noticed in my Twitter feed there was a notification of a message. So I looked at the message and there it was, a message from one of my subscribers who sent me the link to this. It's in the Daily Telegraph and it says, sensitivity readers find fairy tales problematic after re-examining Ladybird's books. Ladybird books are the standard simple readers for kids. I taught my kids to read through Ladybird books. I probably learnt to read through Ladybird books myself. I mean, they've been going on for centuries. Well, quite a long time anyway. So, yeah, they are they were even more middle-class English. They are still rather middle-class English. And what's wrong with middle-class English, I would like to know. That should be, or rather middle-class British should be what everybody aspires to be, including recent immigrants. But of course, yeah, that's not politically correct, is it? To ask people who come here to adopt the customs of the nation. Anyway, they're problematic now. So I saw that and I thought I really have to say something about this. You see, sensitivity readers, for goodness sake, they don't need sensitivity readers. They just need to know how many people buy their books. Love at first sight was the stuff of fairy tales once upon a time, but perhaps no longer. Ladybird has used sensitivity readers, God help us all, to re-examine some of its children's books and fairy stories. Have proved to be problematic. Something wrong there with the English. Anyway, before I carry on, I'll tell you that I'm Granniopteryx on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. I'm also on Twitter, Gab and Parler, where I am at Granniopteryx. I let you know when I've uploaded a new video on those platforms because YouTube can be a bit, well, careless about that. Please like this video, please share it, please subscribe, and if you are subscribed on YouTube particularly, just check that you still are subscribed because I've been given to understand that subscriptions just evaporate for some unknown reason. Okay, yeah, also you can help me financially, buy me a coffee. There are a couple of other links. All the things I've spoken about are in the description. Right, okay. The publisher's back catalogue includes fiction and educational material based on classic tales like Cinderella and Snow White, and the characters and plots in these stories are understood to be potentially troubling for inclusion experts. Not for children, by the way, and largely speaking, not for the parents of the children, just inclusion experts. Now, I've been into this expert thing before, haven't I? The world is full of experts now. No, it isn't. It's full of people who shoot off their mouths about how much they know about a subject when they don't know anything at all, but it earns them a living. Right, handsome princes and beautiful princesses falling for them at first sight have been deemed problematic by sensitivity readers. Advising on offensive content. It's offensive to talk about love at first sight and handsome princes. Due to the privilege given to physical attractiveness and heteronormative romance. I'm sorry, all these so-called experts don't know enough about human nature to know that that is often one of the ways. And look, I want to tell you a story of my own personal experience. I was in the queue for a restaurant at university. Oh, a restaurant. That's a highfalutin word for the sort of place where I ate when I was a student. Anyway, it was the student cafeteria. It was a noisy, horrible place where, well, the food wasn't that good. And it tended to be very greasy, and I didn't like it, but it was all I could afford. And I was in the queue waiting with my friend, let's call her Sally. And suddenly this chap came past and said hello to Sally because he'd met her some days before. And Sally said to me, Demi, I want you to meet Peter. And I looked at Peter, and Peter looked at me, and I thought he was the most gorgeous man I'd ever laid eyes on in my entire life. By the way, he's a nice-looking fellow, but he isn't the most gorgeous man in the world. But that's what I saw through my eyes. And we started talking. And it was a very long queue we were shuffling forward. And when we got to the place where there was the trays, I looked round and I said, where's Sally? She'd seen what was going on and she just sloped off. 2 weeks later, he proposed to me. Anyone who says that cannot happen is a liar or an idiot. In most cases, I'd say these sensitivity inclusion experts, they're just idiots. Right. Outdated or harmful elements in fairy tales. There is nothing outdated about love and human contact. There's nothing outdated at all about it. And since heteronormative relationships are the majority, then I don't see why the book shouldn't cater to the majority in that way. There may be other books that will cater to minorities. But I don't see why the whole Ladybird canon should be brought into question just because there's a minority that might or might not be noisy. I don't think they are. I don't think that that, for instance, gay people are that bothered about the Ladybird books, frankly. According to publishing insiders, may also include characters presuming each other's pronouns or social class, and a lack of diversity among blonde-haired and blue-eyed protagonists. Look, if you're giving stories about from German fairy tales from the 13th and 14th century, what do you expect? You know, I read a lot of books when I was a kid, and many of them were written about men. I may have identified with some of the heroes of those stories. When I read Robinson Crusoe, I identified with Robinson Crusoe. I didn't need to have Robinson Crusoe turned into Robin Crusoe. I just took the character as he was. Ladybird, a Penguin-owned imprint known for producing books for young children, has not commented on the sensitivity. Look, Penguin, please, I beg you, stop this nonsense. Children have a bit more sense than that. They can read a story. They can see whether it applies to them or it doesn't. And they can make it apply to them even if it doesn't apparently apply to them in the pictures. Don't mess around with it. When we say heteronormative, we are actually saying the majority of normal people. I know there are people who deviate from that norm. They are a minority. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's very awkward for them. But that's what nature does. There are some people on the edges of what we call normal, who are on the edges for a reason. We shouldn't try to make everybody on the edges. There was somebody speculated once, for instance, that homosexual, especially effeminate homosexual men, were necessary. If you're living in caves, it might be good to have somebody around who doesn't like to go out with the chaps hunting elk or wildebeest or whatever, because somebody with the strength of a man back home, who is going to be handy for carrying and pulling things, and because effeminate he may be, but he will have the strength of a man. That's a useful person to have around. There is always a use. I heard people who are colourblind, for instance. It's been noticed that people who are colourblind can see camouflaged animals more clearly than people who have normal colour vision. I don't know why. It might be a difference in grey tone, or a heightened perception for movement or something like that. But that has been noticed, that nearly every deviation from the norm has a use in nature. It's like a sort of bankable asset that nature keeps there in storage for times when it's useful. And so trying to pretend that everybody is like that, there's always going to be a chunk in the middle that's the norm. And then there's going to be these bits on the end which can be drawn on, but they are not good in every situation. Okay, Ladybird has not commented. Please, Ladybird, don't comment and don't listen to these so-called experts, because they aren't experts. They're just damagers. Love at first sight. While a commonplace plot device in fairy tales, love at first sight is problematic because the swooning of characters like Cinderella before they have properly spoken to their beloved is necessarily provoked by physical attractiveness, and therefore privileges beauty over character traits and getting to know people. You see, this isn't the case. In my case, I saw a beautiful man. Well, at least that's what he looked like to me, but I wasn't, so I suppose, not so much the way he looked as the way I immediately related to him. Oh, I'm not going to go through pronouns, class, ageism. Oh, ageism, right. Just as the good characters are so often paragons of youthful beauty, the baddies in fairy tales are often depicted as wizened old crones and witches, including the villain in Snow White, but not exclusively. How many fairy tales are there which show a young man being kind to an old lady and she turns out to be a good fairy, or even an enchanted princess? And how many times do you get somebody who looks beautiful and turns out to be an evil witch? You know, this is rubbish. This is somebody who doesn't know. These are people who do not know their fairy tales, and we can actually blame their teachers for that. Diversity. Oh, for goodness sake, plots. The story of Cinderella, you know, with the little feet. That goes right the way back to China. Goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a story that came from China and worked its way across the Eurasian continent. Why did it do that? Because it resonated with people. The problem with all these problematic story changers, they come up with stories that don't resonate with people. When things have had their day, people stop talking about them, stop relating the stories, and stop doing anything with them, and go on to something else. That's what happens when stories don't resonate. You can't force them to resonate. Well, you can try, it won't work. It just comes up with dead, pointless, meaningless, soulless stories. Gay couples. Look, you can write stories about gay couples, but these are traditional stories from previous years, and that's what they are. Oh, yeah. All right. Well, there you are. That's the thing, and that's Granniopteryx getting angry again. Okay. Till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Granniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.